Hey everybody, on today's episode of the Founder University podcast, we've got a great episode on financial planning for startups by Richard Wang from Pilot. In this episode, you'll learn how to understand your budget and how to optimize it for the current economy, and you'll also learn some tips on how to extend your runway. All right, let's get into it.
Hey everyone, today I'll be talking to you about financial planning for startups. My name is Richard on the Pilot CFO services team. This comes at a really important time as the macroeconomic climate now especially will really favor founders with stronger financial discipline and foresight, and will really separate you out from the rest of the pack if you really do have that down pat. And today what we want to do is just be short and sweet and go over some budgeting 101, how to think about financial planning, and then some special tips on how to approach this process during a downturn such as right now that we're facing in the market. So simply put, budgeting is really important, and startups often fail because they ran out of money. This may sound obvious, but doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a great product or a huge market opportunity or a team that's really good. But sometimes it's just because they didn't focus enough on responsible financial planning. And for a lot of founders, I know this isn't your favorite part of the business to focus on, but it's really important to get right. And if you have less than 18 months of runway, for instance, probably a good time to start thinking about the plan and thinking about how you want to extend your runway and what you're going to do once you hit the end of that runway. So when it comes down to it, budgeting is really important because it'll help you understand what's driving your costs, and it'll help you understand ways that you can extend that runway, ways for you to grow your revenue. And even just going through the process of building that budget can help you just get a better understanding of the financial drivers of your business. So a lot of founders have this light bulb moment when they go through this process and they realize, hey, my unit economics are not working out after all, or we're spending way too much money on XYZ vendor. And even just going through the process of sitting down and building that budget and that plan for the next year and a couple of years will help you really solidify and understand some of these problems. So I'll spend a bit of time talking about how to actually think about this and the tactical strategy for how we on CFO services at Pilot think about building a solid budget. We can break this down into a couple of key categories. Revenue is usually target driven. So as the founding team, you want to set a target for where you want to be. If you want to double revenue because you need to do that for your investors, then great. You set that target and you can figure out how to get there using the different levers that you have. We can typically break this down into three lenses: acquisition, retention, monetization. So how you acquire your customers, at what rate do they retain or churn, and how are you actually making money off them? So acquisition, this is probably the most custom part of any sort of forecast. There's a lot of different ways to determine this based on how your own business grows and what your own growth model is. If your main go-to-market motion is sales, for instance, then a great place to start is the sales headcount. So how many AEs do you have? What is their quota for each of them? And how does that add up to the revenue that you're projecting? If it's marketing driven, you can focus on your average cost of acquisition and then your marketing spend and go from there. Retention and monetization, this really depends on some of your historicals as well. You want to look back if you have this data and say, hey, how are my customers retaining over time? And how can I forecast that forward based on the new customers I'm acquiring? And for monetization, if there's any key pricing changes, you'll want to make sure that you estimate the impact of that on your future revenue forecast as well. For cost of goods sold, for most software companies, this is mostly just hosting and merchant fees, which don't really make up a lot. But if you do have a customer success team or a service team that's really closely tied to product delivery or service delivery, then you might want to consider thinking about their salaries as part of COGS here as well, to have a more accurate picture of how much it costs for you to deliver the product or service. For most startups, people make up most of operating expenses, and that's why it's really important to have a hiring plan for each of these key functions. So this is something I emphasize a lot, where for early stage founders, as you're building out your business, really want to make sure you get a clear idea of how many people you plan to hire for each of these functions, and make sure you have a good way of getting to that number. So often this is based on the revenue target. If I want to triple revenue, how many more salespeople would that take? If I want to triple revenue, that means I need to launch this new product feature. So how many engineers will it take to get us there on the product roadmap? And then finally, for all your other operating expenses, good place to start, just to look at your historicals and tweak from there based on any major plans you have. If you're planning for an offsite, for instance, make sure you have that factored in the right months or the right quarter in your forecast. So why is this really important right now is the state of the market. VC investing activity is not doing great and is down across the board. So deal value is down, deal activity is down, valuations are down. Bottom line is fundraising environment is not yet showing signs of improving. And as a result, if your runway is running a little bit low, you want to really make sure that you have a good solid plan to get through to the end of the year and probably beyond, just to give you some extra leeway there as well. If you're raising a round, close it as soon as you can. If you're able to raise, you should probably consider it, regardless of the valuation. As at this point, I think survival is really the number one priority if you are in a position where you feel like your cash may not take you through to the end of this downturn. So what are some tactical ways for you to actually extend your runway and think about budgeting differently and think about financial planning differently during this period of time? A couple of different key things here that we'd recommend. Number one is just to revisit your budget assumptions, make sure everything is conservative. The drivers of your business may have shifted. Your customers may be impacted as well. So during a downturn like this, metrics like your sales cycle could increase, for instance. The length of your sales cycle could increase, make it take longer to close deals. Your average deal sizes may go down. Your churn may increase as well, depending on, once again, your business and who your customers are. So it's really important to make sure that you're forecasting these accurately and they provide a realistic and conservative picture of where you'll end up. Number two is scenario planning. You can't really see the future, but what you can do is plan for all the different possible futures or the likely possible futures. So you want to ensure that if you have bear case scenario, that you have a plan B to survive that, if that is the case, and if that does happen, if you miss your revenue targets or some other key target. Number three is you really want to focus on efficiency metrics. So this whole growth at all costs mentality is not really working anymore in this current environment. So we really want to foster a culture of responsible spending. You can make cost savings an internal KPI for leaders within your own business. And you really want to focus on metrics like the burn multiple, for instance, which is your net burn over your net new revenue over that same period. And from an investor perspective as well, there will be shifting focus more towards these types of metrics versus the growth at all costs mentality. Number four, you want to collect cash upfront. So this may seem obvious, but cash is king at the end of the day. And especially during a period where your cash reserves may be running low, you want to really focus on getting cash in the door. And the way you can do this is through the deals with your own customers. You can perhaps offer discounts on prepaid plans or annual subscriptions. And you can make sure that you can do everything you can to collect the cash upfront rather than afterwards. Number five, review and renegotiate vendor contracts. So vendors oftentimes have a lot more flexibility than a lot of startups realize in terms of how much they're willing to sort of flex just to be able to collect that revenue and be able to retain you as a customer. So there's often some opportunity here to talk to these vendors and say, hey, because of my current cash situation, would you be open to XYZ terms on this contract? A lot of the time they'll say yes, and that could be a good way for you to reduce some of those extra costs. Number six, reduce payroll costs. So as I mentioned earlier, because payroll is such a big cost for most startups, what's really important here is to make sure that you're spending efficiently. From a hiring plan perspective, you might want to consider hiring freezes or just being smart about new headcount. And instead of approving new headcount without sort of a good reason, you may want to think about pausing bonuses, potentially founder salaries to extend some runway and to also send a strong signal to the business that you're committed to keeping. Last resort, you can consider furloughing employees in the short term. And as a last resort, you can consider doing layoffs. If you are to take this path, make sure that you take a little bit more off than you think you need, just in case, so you don't have to do it again. Because I think the number one rule here, best practice, is to make sure that you're not repeatedly doing rounds of layoffs, because that can really impact the morale of the company as well. So in conclusion, in this time of uncertainty, we want to make sure that being rigorous with our financial planning is really important. And we want to pay attention to that cash so we don't end up in a situation that we could have avoided earlier on. So thank you for listening. If you're interested in finding out more about some of these topics or chatting with our CFOs, you can go to this link right here, book a free one-on-one consultation with Pilot's CFO services team, where we're happy to talk you through the process of how to build your budget and how to build a plan that's custom to your business, and will help you get through these times and beyond.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. And if you want to see more tactical content, be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or your favorite podcast player. If you want to rate and subscribe, that's great. And if you've got an idea right now and you're inspired to build an MVP or an idea that you want to build into an actual company, just apply to my 12-week course, Founder University, at founder.university/apply. It's free to come to the Founder University if you come to all 12 weeks. And we invest $25,000 in the top graduates to help them grow even more. Again, you can apply for the upcoming cohort, founder.university/apply. And if you would like to give a tactical talk here on this pod, you can submit your presentation at founder.university/submit.